visit Cuba next month. I don't know if you'd heard that, but I'm wondering, as president, is that something you would do?
It is not, as long as the Castros are in power. And I will say I was saddened to hear that. I wasn't surprised. This was foreshadowed for a long time. And you know, President Obama's foreign policy has consistently alienated and abandoned our friends. There has never been an administration more hostile and antagonistic to Israel than the Obama administration. And what President Obama has shown to our enemies is weakness and appeasement. So his policy concerning Cuba and Iran both have parallels, where he's allowing billions of dollars to go to tyrants who hate America, who are state sponsors of terrorism, who are fighting against our nation. I think it's a real mistake. I think the president ought to instead be pushing for a free Cuba. It's 90 miles off the coast of America. And to go there and essentially act as an apologist, you know, it was really striking. When the Cuban officials came to Washington with the opening of the embassy, a Cuban dissident came to the press conference and wanted to ask a question. And the John Kerry State Department said if she asked a question, she would be forcibly and physically removed. And I, you know, I remember being astonished because she said, look, I expected that treatment in Cuba. That's what they do to free speech here. But the Obama State Department was happy to silence a dissident to protect the Cubans from even asking questions. I mean, listen, my dad was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. He fought with Castro in the revolution, and he was imprisoned and tortured by Batista. And then my aunt, my tia Sonia, was imprisoned and tortured by Castro. And so my family has seen firsthand the evil and the oppression in Cuba. And we need to have a president that stands up to our enemies, that doesn't, you know, if you look at Cuba, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost their major patron, their source of money. But then what happened is Venezuela stepped in and became a patron. And you saw the oil revenues, and actually Cuba had a corrupt bargain where they would send thugs, they would send soldiers down to Venezuela that they would use to oppress the citizens there, and in exchange Venezuela would send money. Well, as oil prices have been tanking, Venezuela's economy is in free fall. And suddenly Cuba was again on the ropes. The Castros were again on the ropes. And just like with Iran, the Obama administration steps in with a lifeline. And I'll tell you one of the things, Anderson, I'm very concerned about, is that Obama is emptying Guantanamo. He is releasing terrorists that our soldiers bled and died to capture. And the next president is going to have to send soldiers out to capture them again or kill them when they return to waging jihad. And I fear that by the end of this year, President Obama plans to give the Guantanamo Navy base back to Cuba, which would be undermining U.S. national security interests profoundly. I hope he doesn't do that, but it is consistent with his pattern in the last 7 years. I think it is a profound risk.
If trials can't be brought against the people in Guantanamo, what would you do with them? Keep them there indefinitely?
If they are terrorists who are waging jihad there, then they should be detained in Guantanamo. We could have military tribunals if need be. We can interrogate them. But the Bill of Rights does not apply to foreigners who are waging war against America. The Bill of Rights applies to Americans. And the people in Guantanamo, at this point, it's down to the worst of the worst. You know, a really alarming percentage of the people released from Guantanamo return immediately to waging jihad, return immediately to going back trying to murder Americans. And part of the consequence of Obama is he engages in this politically correct denial where he and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and the whole Democratic Party, they won't even say the words radical Islamic terrorism. They don't acknowledge what they're fighting. And it's part of the reason why we are so vulnerable, because we don't have a commander-in-chief that is fighting the enemy and defeating the enemy.
I want to bring in our audience question. Before I do, probably the toughest question of the night, though, for you. Which side are you on, Clemson or South Carolina?
On this, I am going to shamelessly waffle and say I love them both.
Okay. All right, good answer.